That night, I thought my brother just wanted to talk, nothing more. I barely had a moment to react. He stepped into my room, shut the door behind him, and before I could say a word, he was close. He leaned in, his voice low, saying things that sent a shock through my entire body. After months apart, the distance between us had built something we both tried to ignore. But that night, everything shifted. It all began when I came back home after being away for a while. It hadn't been that long, just a few months, but pulling into the driveway felt like I was stepping into a memory, not returning to my life. The house looked the same. The chipped white paint still peeled around the edges, and the old oak tree leaned over the front lawn like a worn-out guardian. But everything felt smaller, like the world had kept going without me. Even the air was different, sharper somehow, with a strange hint of loneliness clinging to it. I sat behind the wheel longer than I meant to, gripping it tightly, trying to gather the courage to go inside. Before I could even reach for my bag, the front door swung open. There he was, my brother, standing in the doorway like he'd been waiting. For a moment, I couldn't think at all. He looked different. Not just older, stronger. His shoulders had filled out, stretching the sleeves of his black t-shirt. His hair was a little messier, but it looked like it was meant to be that way. The softness in his face had faded, replaced with sharper lines and a shadow of stubble along his jaw. He looked like someone who belonged somewhere I hadn't been. And then he smiled. That same wide, easy smile. For a second, I let myself believe nothing had changed. "'Bout time, Squirt!" he called out, his voice warm. His voice was rougher, deeper than I remembered. I let out a short laugh, forcing myself to move, to close the space between us. "Missed you too, jerk," I muttered. He stepped forward, and before I could think twice, he pulled me into a hug. It was tight, solid, grounding. I froze, surprised by the force of it, the way he lifted me slightly off the ground like I weighed nothing. His chest was warm against mine, steady and strong in a way that felt both safe and strangely unfamiliar. My hands found the back of his shirt, gripping harder than I meant to. Maybe it was the time apart. Maybe it was just the shock of seeing him like this. Grown. That's what I told myself later. He didn't let go right away. His hands stayed at my back, fingers curling slightly against the fabric of my jacket like he wasn't ready to pull away. When he finally set me down, his hands slid slowly down my arms before falling away completely, and in their absence, a sudden chill crept over me, despite the afternoon sun. "You look different," he said, his eyes moving over me like he was trying to memorize every detail. I laughed, awkward, shoving my hands inside. The house smelled like old wood and laundry detergent, like time had soaked into every corner. I stood there for a moment, letting the familiarity settle around me. But it didn't quite fit anymore, like a jacket I'd outgrown but couldn't bring myself to let go of. "You hungry?" he asked, already hossing my bag onto the stairs that led to my old room. "Mom made her lasagna last night before heading out." "Starving," I said, and right on cue, my stomach growled in agreement. As we walked into the kitchen, I caught him watching me again. Not the casual kind of glance you give someone you haven't seen in a while. This was different. His eyes didn't just pass over me. They lingered, tracking each movement like he was studying me, or comparing me to some version of me that only lived in his memory. I kept myself busy, pulling plates from the cabinet, pretending not to notice, pretending my skin wasn't burning under the weight of his gaze, pretending the air between us hadn't gone heavier, harder to breathe. He sat down at the table, leaning back in his chair with his arms folded behind his head, his shirt stretching tight across his chest. He looked relaxed, like he didn't have a care in the world, but there was tension in his jaw, a sharpness in his eyes that didn't match the lazy sprawl of his body. We talked while we ate, about everything and nothing. Classes, work, the neighbors who apparently bought a new car and made a whole event out of it. I laughed at the right moments, nodded when I should. But inside, I stayed curled up tight, alert, tuned to every small shift in his posture, every flicker in his expression. It was stupid. Just nerves. Just being home again after so long. That's what I told myself later, after the sun dipped below the trees, and the house settled into its usual creaks and sighs. We ended up in the living room, tossing a football back and forth like we used to. It should have felt comforting, but instead it felt like a setup, like the walls were closing in, just a little tighter with each pass. At one point, he missed the ball. It bounced off his chest and rolled to the floor. He lunged for it, laughing. And I dove, too. We collided in a tangle of limbs and laughter. He pinned me easily, straddling my hips, holding my wrists down with one hand, like it took no effort at all. But it wasn't nothing. Not to me. Everything froze for a second. I stared up at him, breathless. His face hovered inches from mine. His grin faded, morphing into something softer, something more dangerous. His grip on my wrists tightened just slightly. And for a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Neither of us said a word. Then, with a laugh, he pushed off and ruffled my hair like he used to. Still the weakling, I see. I laughed too, forcing the sound out, rolling onto my stomach to hide on after that. But the feeling didn't leave. If anything, it grew. A steady, humming weight in my chest that made it hard to sit still, hard to breathe right. When I finally dragged myself upstairs and shut the door behind me, I leaned against it for a long moment, heart pounding against my ribs. I wasn't just the little brother anymore. Maybe I never had been. The first day back had already felt strange, but it was in the days that followed that things really began to shift. Slowly at first, subtle enough to pretend I didn't notice. Pretending only worked for so long, and with each passing day, it got harder to lie to myself. It started with the way he looked at me. At first, I chalked it up to curiosity, just a brother trying to reconnect. I'd been gone for months. Maybe he was just trying to see what had changed, trying to close the gap that time had opened between us. That's what I told myself the morning I caught him staring at me across the kitchen. The toaster hummed softly between us, the smell of bread in the air. But his eyes didn't move when I looked up. He didn't glance away. He just held my gaze, steady, unreadable, until the toast popped up, breaking whatever invisible thread had stretched between us. And it wasn't just the staring. It was the touch, too. We'd always been physical growing up. Roughhousing, playful shoves, arm punches. It had been easy, simple, thoughtless. But now his hand would brush my back as he passed, and it would linger for a beat too long. His fingers would graze my wrist when handing me a glass. And instead of letting go right away, they'd pause, warm and firm against my skin, before finally pulling away like he had to remind himself to do it. And the worst part? I felt it, every single time. The heat of his touch stayed with me, like a mark that sunk beneath the skin, invisible but impossible to ignore. I kept telling myself I was imagining it, that it was just nerves, just part of adjusting to being home again. But the excuses started to fall apart fast. One afternoon, we ended up in the backyard, wrestling like we used to. It was supposed to be harmless, just two brothers messing around, burning off energy the way we always had. It started as boredom. He tackled me easily, pinning me to the grass, laughing as I struggled beneath him. But when I stopped fighting, expecting him to let me up, he didn't. He stayed there, his weight pressing me into the earth. His hands found my wrists again, circling them like he had that first night. His laughter faded, leaving only silence between us. When I turned my head to look at him, I found him already watching me, expression unreadable, his eyes dark with something I didn't have a name for. A beat passed, then he let go, grunting as he pushed off and tossed me my cap like nothing had happened. But I lay there longer than I should have, staring up at the sky, feeling like the ground beneath me wasn't as steady as it used to be. Staring up at the sky, feeling like the ground beneath me wasn't as steady as it used to be. That night, we ended up on the couch. A movie flickered in the background, but neither of us paid it any real attention. I stretched out across the cushions, legs comfortably sprawled. He dropped down beside me, close enough that our shoulders brushed. I didn't move. Neither did he. The space between us felt thick, charged with something unspoken. His thigh pressed lightly against mine, and he didn't shift away. He just let it sit there, solid, warm, like a silent question I didn't know how to answer. At one point, I leaned forward to grab the remote from the coffee table. When I sat back, our bodies bumped, a small, awkward tangle of limbs. But it left me half sprawled across him, my chest brushing against his side, my face too close to the hollow of his throat where his pulse beat fast and steady. I froze. So did he. The movie kept playing, casting flickering blue light across the walls, but we stayed perfectly still. I could feel his heart pounding, or maybe it was mine, loud enough that it seemed to echo in the quiet between us. His breath hitched, barely noticeable. Then, with the subtlest shift, he gave me just enough space to slide off him. Not quite a retreat, but a careful move that left everything unsaid. Neither of us spoke. I pretended to focus on the screen, but I couldn't tell you a single thing about that movie. All I could think about was the way his body had felt beneath mine. Too warm, too steady, too familiar, and yet completely foreign. I could still feel the ghost of his touch where our skin had met, still smell the faint mix of soap and something purely him. I hated myself for noticing, and worse, for wanting to notice. The next day didn't make it easier. We kept finding excuses to brush past each other. In the hallway, in the kitchen, over the last slice of pizza. We stood too close when there was plenty of space. But it wasn't just the touches. It was the way he looked at me, not like a brother should. His gaze was too focused, too intense, like he was memorizing the curve of my jaw, the line of my throat, the way my mouth shifted when I tried not to smile. And worse. I started looking back. At first, I caught myself. Looked away quickly, cheeks burning, but it kept happening. Stolen glances, slow, drawn-out looks that lasted just a second too long to be innocent. Every time our eyes met, something inside me tilted. And like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. I hadn't meant to climb. I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment, every accidental brush of skin, every lingering glance, every half-smile that felt like it carried some unspoken truth. My body ached with the confusion of it, the wanting and the fear, so I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I wasn't supposed to feel this way. Not about him. Not ever. But pretending it wasn't happening, pretending I didn't notice, wasn't working anymore. By the fourth night, after yet another too-long wrestling match and another too-close tangle on the couch, I knew something for sure, something that scared me more than anything else. Something between us was shifting, and neither of us was doing anything to stop it. By the time Friday rolled around, the tension between us was almost alive, thick, restless, humming just beneath the surface. I kept telling myself it was in my head, that it was just the weirdness of being back home, trying to fit into a space that had moved on without me. But deep down, I knew better. Some feelings, once they've taken root, you can't just unfeel. Our parents had been planning their weekend trip for weeks, some anniversary getaway they'd been hinting at for months, and no amount of silent wishing could change the fact that they were leaving us alone in the house. I stood by the front window that afternoon, watching their car disappear down the street, the taillights fading into the distance. Something heavy sank in my chest. The house felt different immediately, too still, too quiet. Not the comforting kind of quiet, the kind that leaves too much space for thoughts, for silence, for mistakes. When I turned around, he was already in the living room, tossing a football up and catching it with easy rhythm. His shirt clung to him in the summer humidity, muscle and movement outlined in the soft light. When he looked up, a slow grin tugged at the corner of his mouth, not the usual teasing smirk, but something heavier, slower, something that made my stomach twist. "Just you and me now, Squirt," he said, tossing the ball without warning. I caught it instinctively, clutching it to my chest like a shield. "Yeah," I muttered, trying to sound casual, trying to lighten the mood even as my heart thudded against my ribs. Try not to burn the place down while they're gone, he said, chuckling low in his throat, a sound that wrapped around me like smoke. No promises, I shot back, forcing a grin. We ended up outside, tossing the ball like old times. The sun hung low in the sky, casting everything in molten gold and bruised purple. At first, it felt almost normal. The easy rhythm of throw and catch, the familiar comfort of something simple. But it didn't stay that way for long. He started throwing harder, pushing me back with each catch, challenging me. I dug my heels into the grass, grinning despite myself, rising to match him. When I finally hurled the ball with everything I had, he caught it one-handed, smug. "Show off," I called, breathless. Then he charged. I barely had time to brace myself before he tackled me, and the breath whooshed out of my lungs in a single sharp gasp as we hit the grass. Hard. We hit the ground, tangled together, his weight momentarily holding me down. He laughed, rough, breathless, right in my ear. And for a moment, neither of us moved. The world tilted. His body pressed against mine, all heat and strength. Too much contact, too deliberate to pass off as just roughhousing. His hands found my wrists again, pinning them to the grass like he had that first night. But this time, there was no easy grin to soften it, no laughter to blur the lines. His face hovered above mine, close enough that I could see the tiny scar on his chin, the one he got when he fell off his bike as a kid. Close enough to feel his breath warm against my cheek. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. And for one wild, disorienting second, I didn't want to. He must have seen it. The hesitation, the confusion, the edge of panic in my eyes, because he pulled away. Suddenly, he rolled off me and onto his back with a groan. "Getting slow, little bro," he muttered, his voice tight, almost strained. I forced a laugh, sitting up quickly and brushing the dirt from my jeans. My skin still burned from where he'd touched me, the memory of it sinking in deeper than I could shake. The sky rumbled low in the distance, a deep growl that seemed to rise from the earth itself. A storm was coming, and honestly, I welcomed it. The first fat drops of rain hit the porch as we stepped inside, dark circles blooming across the wood. Thunder cracked overhead, and the house felt like it pulled in tighter around us, walls pressing closer, the air growing thick with the scent of rain. And something else. Something sharp, unspoken, too close to name. Inside, we tried to pretend everything was normal. We raided the fridge for leftovers, argued over what movie to put on, wrestled over the remote like we used to when we were kids. But now, every touch, every glance, every breath carried weight. Everything felt charged. Tense in a way that had nothing to do with the storm outside. At one point during another scuffle over the remote, he grabbed my wrist, his fingers tightening just a moment too long. Then he tackled me onto the couch, laughing breathlessly. But even in that laughter, I felt something shift. His weight against me, the way our bodies pressed together, it made my heart trip in my chest, made something in me light up and recoil all at once. I shoved him off, harder than I needed to, my heart slamming against my ribs. "Chill, man," I said, trying to keep my voice light, steady, trying not to fall apart right there. He laughed it off, sprawling out across the couch like he didn't have a care in the world. But his eyes, they followed me as I stood. I stood, mumbling some excuse about needing to check something upstairs. I didn't look back, just turned and walked, too fast, shoving the door shut behind me harder than I meant to. My chest ached, a hollow, bruised kind of ache that bloomed right behind my ribs. I paced my room, dragging my hands through my hair, trying to make sense of the storm inside me. None of it made sense. It couldn't. He was my brother. And yet, I squeezed my eyes shut, pulling in a ragged breath. I had to get a grip, had to stop letting my body react like this. Like it didn't understand what it was feeling. Nothing was going to happen. Nothing had happened. It was just wrestling, just nerves, just the awkward tension of being back in a place that no longer fit quite right. I threw myself onto the bed, burying my face in the pillow, willing sleep to come and carry it all away, just for a little while. Outside, the storm raged on, rain lashed against the windows, and thunder rolled in deep, lazy growls across the sky. I focused on the sound, clinging to it like a lifeline, letting it drown out the thoughts circling like vultures inside my head. At some point, I must have started drifting, caught in that hazy space where dreams and reality begin to blur. That's when I heard it, soft, almost hesitant. The creak of a floorboard in the hallway. My heart jolted. I sat up slowly, every nerve in my body snapping awake. Another step. This time, the faint pad of bare feet against the old wood floor. He was out there, just beyond the door. A thin strip of light glowed beneath it, a line between safety and something I couldn't name. His fingers hesitated against the metal, trembled, but he turned it anyway. A quiet, merciless snap. And just like that, we were sealed in together. I sat up fast, the blanket falling to my waist, my heart hammering so hard I could barely hear anything else. The walls felt closer now, the ceiling lower. The space between us was thick, heavy, like the very air had turned to fog. He stayed by the door a second longer, his hand still pressed against the wood, like he needed it to steady himself. Then, slowly, almost cautiously, he stepped forward. One hesitant step at a time, until he stood at the edge of the bed, close enough that I could feel the heat of him bleeding into the space between us, close enough that I could catch the faint scent of soap on his skin, and that other scent, the one that was just him. I didn't move. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I couldn't. He lowered himself onto his knees beside the bed, then sat back on his heels, his hands clenched into fists on his thighs, like he was physically holding something in, like restraint was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. His head tilted up toward me, and the look in his eyes, I'd never seen anything like it. It nearly undid me, desperate, aching, terrified. His mouth opened, then closed again. He swallowed hard, his throat visibly tightening, and when he finally spoke, his voice was rough and raw, so fractured it barely sounded like his. "I can't pretend anymore," he whispered. 5 small words. They slammed into me like a wave, knocking all the air from my lungs. I gripped the blanket tight, my knuckles aching from how hard I held on, trying to anchor myself, to ground myself, while the world tilted and spun around us. He was trembling, still kneeling, still breaking, with a truth too heavy to carry in silence anymore. He shut his eyes briefly, as if bracing for impact, then opened them again. Under the dim light filtering from the hallway, his eyes shone with something too big to hide. And then, with all the breath left in him, he said it. "It's always been you." The words tore out of him, like something broken and sharp, like they had been buried deep for far too long. Shock hit first, fast and cold, like the ground falling away beneath my feet. This wasn't real. Couldn't be. Brothers didn't say things like that. Brothers didn't feel things like that. But underneath the shock, twisting inside me like wildfire, was something else. Relief. Horrible, undeniable relief. As if something tight and aching in my chest had finally loosened. As if something I'd never been able to name had suddenly been seen. And I hated it. Hated myself for feeling it, for not recoiling, for not running. But it was there. And I couldn't deny it. He moved a little closer, the mattress shifting beneath his weight. One of his hands lifted slowly, trembling in the heavy air between us. And for a moment, a terrifying, dizzying moment, I thought he was going to touch me. Close the last few inches of space between us. Step past the final line. Shatter what fragile distance still remained. And God help me, some part of me wanted him to. His fingers hovered just inches from my cheek, close enough for me to feel the warmth of him. Close enough to imagine what his touch would feel like. Rough, familiar, impossible. But then, at the last second, he stopped. His hand trembled in the air, then curled into a tight fist and dropped uselessly back to his lap. He bowed his head, pressing the heel of his palm hard against his forehead, like he was trying to push the thoughts out of his skull. His entire body shook with the effort, his posture tight with guilt and regret and everything he was too afraid to say out loud. "I'm sorry," he rasped, barely louder than the rain tapping against the windows. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. And even if it had, I didn't know what I would have said. No words felt big enough, strong enough, brave enough to cross the aching space between us. We stayed there, locked in the silence. Him, still kneeling, hands clenched into fists on his thighs, as if he could hold himself together by sheer will alone. Me frozen in place, heart pounding like thunder in my chest, caught between running and reaching for him. Outside, the storm rumbled low and steady, its voice filling the room, soft and relentless. Just like the silence between us, the rain hammered against the windows, a relentless sound that echoed the wild rhythm of my pulse. Still, neither of us moved. Still, neither of us dared to close the distance, that final, shattering step between everything we were and everything we shouldn't be. The air crackled, buzzing with every word we hadn't said, every feeling we couldn't name. And somehow, in that terrible suspended moment, I knew we were already too far gone. I sat there frozen, trapped between the instinct to flee and the unbearable need to stay. And still, he reached out, slow, hesitant. His fingers brushed my cheek so lightly, I almost didn't feel it, almost believed I'd imagined it, if not for the way my skin flared in response. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. Instead, I leaned into his hand, a soft, broken sound catching in my throat. His breath hitched. His eyes searched mine, pleading, desperate, like he expected me to pull away at any second. But I didn't. My hand moved to his shirt, gripping the fabric at the collar. Not pulling, just holding, anchoring, and for one heartbeat, we stayed like that. So close, too close, everything between us trembling. There was no kiss, no line crossed, just a closeness that hurt to hold, and hurt more to break. He leaned his forehead to mine, his breath shaky and shallow, his hands falling to the bed between us, not touching, but close. So close I could feel the heat of him pulsing in the space. I could feel his heartbeat beneath my palm, wild, uncontrolled, matching mine beat for beat. And in that moment, neither of us spoke. There were no words big enough to carry what had just passed between us, no name for the weight of it. His fingers twitched, brushing against mine, not to hold, not to claim, just to feel, to know that it was real. And for a while, that was enough. Everything we might have said was already etched into the space between us, into that near kiss of a moment, into the way we clung to the silence now, breathless and broken, and somehow more whole than we had ever been before. He reached up again, cupping my face with trembling fingers, his thumb brushing gently over my cheekbone, like he still wasn't sure I was real. I closed my eyes against the sting, turning slightly into his touch, feeling the weight of everything settle heavy in my chest. But something else bloomed there too. Not guilt, not fear, relief, recognition, a kind of acceptance I hadn't known I'd been starving for. Something inside me, something small and scared and hidden for years, had finally stirred awake. And now that it was free, there was no shoving it back into the dark. He shifted beside me, gently pulling me into his arms, until my head rested against his chest, and I could hear the thunder of his heartbeat beneath skin and bone. He buried his face in my hair, not to claim, not to cross a line, but like he just needed to remember that I was there. And I let him. I curled closer, wrapping an arm around his waist, feeling his body relax little by little against mine. Both of us grounding ourselves in the only thing that felt real right now. Outside, the storm raged on, the rain a wild percussion against the windows. But inside, in this small, fragile moment, everything was still. And maybe, for the first time, everything was honest. We stayed like that for what felt like forever. No hawking, no promises, no answers. Just shared breath, shared silence, shared truth. He hadn't run. I hadn't pushed him away. And somehow, that felt bigger than anything we could have said. He'd locked the door behind him when he came in, shutting out the world. But what he really did was unlock something in both of us that neither of us could ever unfeel again. His fingers twitched, brushing against mine, not to hold, not to claim, just to feel, to know that it was real. And for a while, that was enough. Everything we might have said was already etched into the space between us, into that near kiss of a moment, into the way we clung to the silence now, breathless and broken, and somehow more whole than we had ever been before. He reached up again, cupping my face with trembling fingers, his thumb brushing gently over my cheekbone, like he still wasn't sure I was real. I closed my eyes against the sting, turning slightly into his touch, feeling the weight of everything settle heavy in my chest. But something else bloomed there too. Not guilt, not fear. Relief, recognition, a kind of acceptance I hadn't known I'd been starving for. Something inside me, something small and scared and hidden for years, had finally stirred awake. What now? Where do you even begin when everything you thought you knew about yourself has shifted? How do you face the mirror, knowing the reflection is different now? How do you go forward when you can't go back? I don't have the answers. Maybe I never will. All I know is something irreversible happened that night, something terrifying, something beautiful, and no amount of denial will ever undo what it awoke in me. If you were standing where we stood, if you felt what we felt, what would you have done? Would you walk away, pretend it never happened? Or would you stay, no matter the cost, no matter the consequences? Let me know in the comments, because honestly, I'm still trying to figure it out myself. For a while.